This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 31. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. Starting off, I'd like to welcome a new sponsor to the show, Kimber Firearms. Kimber's been a longtime friend of Guns Magazine, and we're thrilled they like the podcast so much they've decided to sign on as our first long-term sponsor. Kimber was founded with the singular purpose of making every firearm the best it can possibly be, with a fit and finish that only practiced hands can achieve and appreciate. Whether you carry a Kimber for personal protection, hunting, or competition, know that their promise of quality without compromise is how they measure success. To learn more about Kimber Firearms, visit kimberamerica.com. On today's show, I'm talking with Jim Scoutten, often called the most widely viewed gun reporter in television history and one of the leading experts in the shooting industry. Jim followed the typical arc of a journalist, starting as a radio reporter, becoming a TV news anchor, detouring into automotive reporting, and finally launching a show called American Shooter. It was the highest rated outdoor program in history. He's currently the host of Shooting USA on the Outdoor Channel, along with his oldest son, John Scoutten. Now here's my conversation with the elder statesman of gun television, Jim Scoutten. Well, good morning, Jim.
Morning. Good morning.
How is it in Franklin, Tennessee this fine morning?
Well, we're expecting some rain, which is going to get in the way of a couple of planned video events that we had this week. So it's like, all right, let's consult the Farmer's Almanac and figure out when we can put a crew out in the field once again.
The challenges of TV.
Well, yeah, and we have continued to work right straight through the, where are we, 8 weeks, 9 weeks into this thing at this point. Believe it or not, television, cable, whatever, has been declared an essential industry.
Yep.
And so we have been all about keeping people informed. We're still producing shows and releasing them to the network and talking about as much as possible the new stuff that people need to know about. And of course, you guys are doing the same thing in guns.com and Guns Magazine and American Handgunner. So it's somewhat business as usual for us.
Somewhat. Well, let's start at the beginning. You've been called America's most watched firearms reporter. Now, I know you started in radio, those many years ago, and you worked all across the country, went to television, and now here you are, the famous Jim Scoutten. How did that journey take place?
Well, yeah, that's far enough back that we talked on the radio mic and you were constantly pedaling on a generator to keep the transmitter up. You know, it's crazy. But yeah, I did initially a couple of years of radio news at an all news radio station up in Minneapolis. Oddly enough, moved to Hawaii. And got a job doing radio news on the number one station. And then over there, where you have to be around long enough to be able to pronounce things in Hawaiian.
Never thought about that.
Made a jump across the street to doing weekend anchoring and reporting at the ABC affiliate in Oahu. That's how it's pronounced. And did that for a couple more years and then made a jump back to the mainland because when you're doing TV news, you do the same thing every day, day in and day out, and you try to find a larger market where your audience is bigger, and so they will pay you more money. And so that's the short course.
Right.
So that ended up with me in Phoenix, Houston, not necessarily in this order, Seattle, Savannah, Georgia is a news director, and I finally just busted out of the business because the old anchorman's disease is getting boozed up between the 6 o'clock and the 10 o'clock because you're doing the same thing over and over again. And it's like, where is this taking me other than, buying me a nice house? So out of that business. And subsequently went to work on two different kinds of programs. One of them lasted 10 years under two titles, and that was Motor Trend Television and Car and Driver Television. And some of those episodes are still out on YouTube, and it's fairly amazing what we used to do with test cars. And the other one was the original version of the gun show, American Shooter. Right. And so I'm trying to do this as short as possible so this doesn't go on forever, but we're talking about 27 years of gun shows at this point. And I started doing that for very little money. But the thought was, as television news and television programs keep trending to younger and younger blonde, airhead people or whatever, was, look, I got to have something I can do at my age where the audience will let me grow old and not complain about it. And so that was the start of the gun shows. We did the American Shooter for 10 years. Company got sold originally to a publishing company that's a competitor of yours. And they didn't have a gun magazine. So they wanted to shut American Shooter down because, well, we have no reason to be doing this because this is all about, new media for our established gun magazines or for our magazines. And so they're going to shut it down. And it was like, hey, I didn't start this 10 years ago to shut it down. Yeah. I started this 10 years ago, started working in this, to be honest about it. Because this is what I needed to do. So necessarily we jumped out, established a new production company, which I'm a partner in. And after a legal fight that went on for a while, we got it on the air as Shooting USA. We didn't own the title American Shooter, which was copyrighted.
Right.
And we've been doing that ever since. So add that all together, and this is 27 years of gun reporting. And I'm pleased to say after 4 different networks, ESPN, TNN, what was OLN, Outdoor Life, that turned into several different things before we got clear of it. And finally landing at Outdoor Channel, we were always one step after somebody bought a network, and they were based in New York City and were horrified to find out they had a Positive Image gun show. And so it was like, all right, we got to move.
Yeah, you can't let that happen. Well, I've got a forward question, but we have to stop there. Is there anything you remember from your time in Hawaii, any of those great names that you had such a hard time pronouncing that kind of sticks in your head now?
Well, yeah. Hawaii is an extraordinary melting pot. Now we're talking, good Lord, 35 years back, something like that. But the Samoans, I'm going to get in trouble here, don't get along with some of the other ethnic groups that are there.
Okay.
So we had machete murders that would come up with some frequency. And as you know, in radio news or television news, if it bleeds, it bleeds. So you master a surname like Iopele Pusi.
Oh, okay.
And then you get into Portuguese or Portuguese, as they even refer to themselves over there. There's Portuguese jokes in Hawaii. Again, I'm going to get in trouble here. But Portuguese looks exactly like Spanish.
Right.
So if you saw a name Rodriquez in Spanish, you pronounce it Rodriguez, right? Mm-hmm. In Portuguese, it's Rodrigues. So if you cannot handle those, the audience immediately knows you have no credibility. You're a haole from the mainland. Haole means white.
Right.
And they're not going to listen to you. So it's an experience with some knowledge remaining of no use to me whatsoever at this point. So,
well, we all have those things floating around. I'm retired law enforcement, and I have this weird thing. I can remember people's middle names. I may not remember their first name, their last name, but I always remember their faces and I remember their middle names. And I think that comes. My first job was a jailer booking folks in. So if I'd booked you in at some point, I would remember your middle name. It's just weird stuff.
It's Eldon, and I thank you for not pointing out that you booked me in sometime.
Okay.
No, and you've got a different situation with your memory than I do. I have trouble remembering the people that I meet, and boy, do we meet people when we do something like the NRA show, and we're standing in the Smith and Wesson booth signing autographs or taking selfies.
Yep.
And so you develop a whole series of responses to people. I never say, great to meet you, because invariably somebody will say, oh, you don't remember? I saw you in 1986. Yeah. So you always say, good to see you. And that's open-ended. It works no matter what. So
I like that. I'm going to steal that because I'm in the same boat. I cannot remember names that well. And doing what we do, going to different events and all this, it's, hey, there you're the guy with the thing at the time with the one thing. And people, if they think you should remember them, they get pretty offended if you don't. And it's just hard when you meet folks.
It's a living room relationship where, you are connecting with them at the point that it's an intimate relationship. It's one-on-one, which is how we talk to the camera. If you're not talking that way, you're overdoing it. You're blowing the audience's hair back. That's too strong for television.
Yeah.
And so they feel that they know you, but the guy who sets himself up for failure is the guy who walks up and says, you don't remember me, do you? And I'm going to confess, no, I don't. Where was it? So that's one of those deals.
Yeah. Well, back to my follow-on question from previous. They say that, you should never see laws and sausage being made because it will disillusion you pretty badly. I would say in my being around the business for a while, I would add television shows to that.
I think so.
How has it changed getting a show on the air in terms of dealing with all that business stuff and backstory stuff?
Well, the deal making is what we never let you see. That's my job. What does the executive producer do? That's officially my title. Okay. And you see that on movies, you see that, on TV series. Everybody's like, oh, okay. So what is he, the boss? Well, yeah. But what the executive producer does is get the money. And if, and there's a saying in the business, nothing happens until somebody sells something. All right. So in our case, that's primarily my job, although John Scoutten, second generation, if you've seen the show, who's taking more and more of a role in reporting, has also been involved in securing sponsors. The biggest change is how we get it to the network. We used to send a standard definition tape, FedEx. And I was racing to the FedEx office some years ago, looked down at the seat of my car where the show that was late was riding along. And I thought, my God, 10 people put their life's work into this for the last 4 weeks. And that's it, this little box here. That's all changed. We don't ship tapes anymore. These shows in high def are fed over a specialized but internet using feed. Well, I guess we have to say application, and they end up landing in a folder at Outdoor Channel headquarters out in Denver, and that's takes about the highest speed internet we can afford at the office. It takes about 8 hours to feed a 1 hour show in high definition. We're talking huge files. And so, that's the change. Business case hasn't changed. The sponsor support hasn't changed. We have major sponsors that have been with us for many years. And if they weren't, well, first of all, they wouldn't be there if we didn't sell stuff. Okay. So it's all about, does this actually create business for them? But they've been there. They believe that what we do works for them to help them hold their position in the market and to move their new products and to have their new products exposed when they're ready for us to show them off on air. I don't think it's much different than your magazine business, or very
Not really.
So the only thing that's changed is a number of folks who are marketing managers have gotten all gaga over digital influencers.
Right.
And apparently nobody taught them in MBA school that there are counties of people that don't have high-speed internet. So
we fight the same battle when we're sitting down and talking about advertising. But, this brings up an interesting point that, nowadays everybody has a YouTube channel. Everybody wants to be an influencer, with 45 million followers. Do you think as high-speed internet grows and everybody from my elderly mother to my kids, they all, consume video on their phones and all that, do you think the day of the big time TV show like yours, is it drawn to a close, or do you think those opportunities are going to keep going? Or how, basically, I guess I'm asking, how has YouTube changed what you do?
Well, we have some limits on what we can post on YouTube, but we've had a channel for some years. We lost the password when a partner left and retired. Just recently regained access to find out we've had something over 11 million views and haven't added anything to it in well over a year. Our limits are we can't put full shows out there because that's a restriction of our network contract, because they, in turn, Outdoor Channel, answer to what are called the MSOs, the multi-system operators. Who am I talking about? Time Warner, Comcast, Spectrum, which is a particular problem from the email I get. And they don't want to have something occupying a channel position, as Outdoor Channel does, that people are paying for, that is free for YouTube. So yeah, there is an evolution going on. However, the bottom line becomes content. And so if you are, and our limits are, we can present, I think 8 or 9 minutes of a segment that has been part of one of our shows. We don't produce separate material for YouTube because there's no revenue model. I mean, here we are back at the business case. Yeah. What's the closest thing to the bank? And so what we are able to say to our sponsors is, look, you're a sponsor of the show. That's where the work gets done. And we also have this YouTube channel. We'll put, a copy of your factory tour that we put together, which is always very popular. Everybody wants to know how, that ammo got made. And so we'll take you inside Hornady's shop.
I'm laughing because I just watched that. So I'm one view on the channel watching that tour.
Okay. All right. And but that was in a show, and that's where it was, our view is that's where it was important. It was providing beneficial editorial for somebody who is one of our best friends. And of course, our best friends are the ones who send checks every month, which is that works. So it's all tied to business. There's a guy on every street corner who has an idea for a great show, who in the meantime is shooting weddings if he's lucky. And you have to understand, it's that original statement I started with: nothing happens till somebody sells something.
Exactly.
And of course, in the age of revised copyright law, we've got a high-powered copyright attorney who keeps watch over what I'm doing, or I would have been, in prison by now. We've got clauses in our insurance policy what's known as an E&O policy, $1 million in case I slander somebody on the air, which says I cannot listen to anybody's proposal for a show. Because if we independently thought up something later that somehow seemed similar. Bang, you're in court. And this is going on all the time here in Nashville in the music industry. Everybody's suing everybody else right now. So,
and the only people that really benefit are the lawyers.
Well, yes, there is that. There is that.
Well, you know, this is a hard question, I know, but I got to ask it. In all these years of doing gun television, is there any particular segments that really stand out in your mind of you thinking, you know, I did a pretty good job on that, or maybe it's memorable for another reason?
Well, you know, I personally like, and I think we're good at, particularly good at the factory stories that I mentioned, the process stories, and involving the people behind the scenes of a product. And so I like those a lot. A few years ago, we got the 2 top officers of Smith & Wesson shooting an IDPA indoor match. Now, this has gone away. They even sold their range up there as they changed their ideas. But that was hysterical because these guys were longtime friends and intense competitors. And so it was like, who's out shooting whom? That was fun. But I like what we call the History's Guns pieces, which share a television secret. Now, you understand the show is a magazine format show because we know that any gun enthusiast is wildly enthusiastic about a particular discipline. Yeah. So they're not enthusiastic about all disciplines. So if we give you 3 segments of USPSA run and gun competition, we will drop in some promos about what's coming as we go to break in each case later in the show. And that'll be a different subject entirely because nobody can sit through 1 hour. I mean, shows have tried it in the past, and here's an hour of one subject matter, and it won't hold an audience. And of course, this is all about building the biggest possible audience. So we do that to make sure they know if you're not really thrilled with what we're showing you right now, we got something coming that you probably going to like. And the number one thing that everybody likes is a History's Guns segment, which is the firearm from the past placed in its point in history and to some extent how it influenced history. Take the Spencer rifle in the Civil War when the Union just like broke the back of the Confederacy. Yeah. And then after the war, they sold all the surplus guns and Spencer went broke. You know, I mean, just stuff like that. But that segment is placed precisely to carry across the bottom of the hour. And that from the news business is what's known as a tune-out factor, to be sure by the time you stop watching the History's Guns that you like to see, it's too late to go surfing to see if there's something else you'd rather be watching. So strategy. Anyhow, that's our game.
So everybody's got blooper reels. I've got some of mine, and most of them, you know, you can't repeat in public, but any that stick out?
Well, yeah, trying to shoot back in the earlier days, previous title, and even when we first started shooting USA, we had what we used to do, what we called shoot a little, talk a little, which was hosting in the field as though I were at a gun range on Saturday morning. This is when the show ran on Saturday morning. Well, it doesn't run on Saturday, so it didn't make any more sense, and it was inefficient to drive, you know, some distance. We've got a private range that John Scoutten has set up. But that's, you know, 45-minute drive away from our offices in Franklin, Tennessee. That's when we switched hosting to the gun room. By the way, I get I get emails, is that really your gun room? And I answer, that is exactly what I would have in my basement if my basement had a 15-foot ceiling. TV lights. And,
Yep.
so, we're honest about it, but we never call it a studio. We always call it a gun room. But
Yeah.
it's set up for efficiency. We can close 2 heavy-duty doors in this office warehouse building that we have, and we're in business.
Yeah.
But back in the day when we were doing shooting, shoot a little, talk a little, being all set, in the counting down for the cameraman, 3, 2, 1, click. And, that's shooting a 1911 without a magazine, let alone without chambering around. So it's just dumb stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or the Johnson that we were trying to shoot to do a History's Guns piece years ago that wouldn't fire on command, but would fire in the air as soon as I backed down to see what was wrong and check the safety, which has no indication of on or off.
Yeah.
So some of that stuff sticks out in my mind. But
those are pretty, suitable for public consumption. So maybe one of these shows, we ought to do the Jim Scoutten blooper reel.
Hey, we never make mistakes.
Oh,
actually,
really?
The rule that I ascribe to is we never let them see you sweat. We never let them see that there's TV lights overhead.
Yeah.
And so you were talking about the sausage making. That's part of it. We want to maintain the image. So
yeah. I always ask our guests, so what is Jim Scoutten's favorite personal gun? You've got, it looks like a Mossberg 500 over there in the corner or something of that flavor, but
actually that's one of 3 defensive shotguns placed in the house. I like pump shotguns for emergencies. We hope the emergency never comes, but I assume bad guys don't watch your show, so I'll tell you where they are. We have basically a 1-floor plan, kind of odd looking ranch style house on top of our hill here in the woods. And it's long enough that one defensive gun will not serve the purpose. And that's, as a result, I've got 3 shotguns. One is pistol grip Mossberg in the umbrella stand behind the front door. You'd be amazed. You can't see it. It's in there with some
That's a
umbrellas.
great idea. I never thought of that.
One is in the master bedroom. That's the very far end of the house. And this is the extreme opposite end. And that is a Winchester Defender.
Oh, okay.
Bought some years ago. And there's a funny story about I think it's funny about getting the wife to try it, because the deal was, hey, I'm going to go to the office. If there's going to be trouble here, you need to know how to shoot this thing.
Yeah.
So being the stupid husband, we went down shortly after I brought this Winchester home. And a Winchester's a pretty heavy gun, so it's going to help with recoil, right? Yeah, sure. So I grab a handful of shells. We go down the back to have part of our hill as a backstop. And not thinking about it, I happened to grab a handful of high brass duck loads. And so she steps up, pulls, and she's only just barely over 5 feet, pulls the trigger on the first one. We get a blast of flame out of the barrel, and it knocks her down. And she says, I don't think this is going to work for me.
Yeah.
So stupid husband goes out and buys low recoil buck the next day. So
there you go. You're a man after my own heart. I've made this abundantly clear through our magazines and videos. As a retired cop, I came up in the days before patrol rifles, and I like patrol rifles. I've got them sitting all around, but my weapon of choice, the one I've literally got under my side of the bed, I like pump shotguns, and part of it's familiarity, but I still think they're hard to beat. And people call them an anachronism, but well, I'm an anachronism too. But you could have anything you want. Why do you choose a shotgun?
Well, all of that stuff that is supposedly being debunked by all the influencers, right? None of these shotguns are chambered, but they are quickly chambered, and that sound is probably going to empty any trouble out of your house before you get near having to make a confrontation.
Yeah.
I like them. They're absolutely stone cold safe, sitting there with an empty chamber and a loaded tube magazine. So that's one part of it. By the way, there is the equivalent of a patrol rifle right over there with 5 30-round magazines, Magpul magazines lined up, ready to go. That's if I have to stop them at the top of the hill coming up the driveway.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like I get plenty of guns, but the real principle is that is the classic Clint Smith one. You use your handgun to fight your way to your long gun.
Exactly.
And having done some close-in patterning over the years, most of these shotguns are actually loaded with, I think, number 8 birdshot because of, the recoil factor. And if you look at what birdshot is doing and has not yet left the shot cup at 10, 12, 15 feet, you are basically shooting a slug. And
exactly.
So there's the stopping factor if you ever need it. It's there if the front door is busted open. I like them. So
yeah, well, having done what I did before, I've seen the results, and it's pretty hard to argue what a shotgun will do across the room. Now, we've talked long guns. What is your personal carry weapon?
Well, for years, and here it is right here. Let me clear it. This is a Smith & Wesson 342 Airlight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. And this was the first generation. Now, they don't make this one anymore.
Right.
This was 38 Special Plus P, and that's what it's loaded with. 5 rounds of Hornady's critical
defense.
Yep, you betcha. And
cool.
That's not because they're a sponsor. That's because I've seen what it'll do in gel block. And this is the ultralight frame, as you would know, titanium cylinder, steel-lined barrel, and it's under a pound loaded. So, and my theory has always been that I don't go anywhere where I need more than 5 rounds. It's kind of the Jeff Cooper thing. If you need more than 7 rounds, you lost. So
yeah.
So that's the personal carry gun. However, and the Centennial, because it doesn't catch on clothing, and I've carried it for years in a fanny pack, and I'm old enough that I just look like a sloppy tourist, and it's amazing how few people understand what's in a fanny pack.
Well, that's good to hear, because I've admitted I use a fanny pack. I was just mowing yesterday. I like them, especially when I'm out doing work in the yard, because when you're bending and doing all that, you don't have to worry about the gun on your hip and all that. But I get abused for carrying a fanny pack. So now we are brothers in arms. If it's good enough for Jim Scoutten, it's good enough for me.
Well, I've only had at least people who said so. One cop who was working an assignment guarding a movie theater, and I was dropping off one of the sons years ago, wanted to know what I was carrying. And that wasn't aggressive. He was just curious. Yeah. He figured out who I was. And so he knew that I was packing in a fanny pack.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing is that I still wear the fanny pack on out-of-town trips, because there's no gun in there, because we're going places and we're flying, and it's, like, oh boy.
Yeah.
But it's the handiest way of stripping off all of your metal when you go through TSA. And
never thought of that.
Well, it's just like, pop the latch and put it in the bin, and you're good.
Yeah.
But I wear it around with, cigarettes and, the room key and stuff like that in Vegas. And we were staying some years ago at what was the Hilton out there for, I think for a SHOT Show, and turned around. We were in a line for, I think, breakfast in the cafe. And here come 2 security guards on the double. to want to know what was in the fanny pack. So these
wow.
guys were informed. And one of them became an online, email friend. We'd exchange emails from time to time. But those guys knew what they were looking for. So, but most people don't know. They just, they just think you're, carrying your car keys, which in fact I am. There's car keys in there. So,
well, it's good to know. Now, you get to handle all kinds of guns, historical to the stuff that hadn't even been released on the market. Is there anything on your wish list you haven't got to do yet?
Not really. I've considered applying for and paying all the fees to own some Class 3 full auto stuff.
Yeah.
I've considered it and finally said, why would I spend all that money to do that? And so lately we've worked with a local Class 10 licensed constructor and brought in some of his guns to do History's Guns pieces, and I've shot them. And I'm the guy who paid, the company is paid the horrendous ammo bill that resulted from this. And so that was good enough. I really don't need to be a Class 3 collector. What am I missing? I don't know if I've missed anything. And of course, the audience imagines, not to disabuse them of their imaginings, that because the guns come in no charge, pretty much anybody we ask for a gun will send it on a T&E deal. It goes through our affiliated license FFL store. We use a friendly store to bring it in and then sign it out, usually to me, and we bring it back and then shoot it, play with it, whatever. They imagine that I'm out every weekend shooting the latest exotic, newest models. Frankly, I'm not. I'm at home, having a beer, watching the first NASCAR race to be restored, because good many years ago, this became work. And so I'm not shooting unless the camera is rolling, and that is for a specific purpose that's going to add to our television work.
So you're not a spring chicken, Jim. I'll be the first to say that.
Oh boy.
I'm sorry, but so what does the future hold for you, for the television show and your production company?
Well, we've been working at it very seriously for the last 5 years, to one extent or another, probably as far back as 10 years. Now, Shooting USA has been on the air under that title for 15 years. So to kind of give you a little perspective here, John Scoutten, eldest son, who is now in his 40s, has always been involved in these shows because he was involved in American Shooter as a high school kid who got hired freelance to be, carrying gear around. So he's been there all along. He's now show producer, segment producer, specialist in competition coverage that he handles. And we are making more and more and more of an on-air transition to him. Because you can't have 10 people who rely on their income hoping I don't step in front of a bus or get knocked down by COVID-19. And so John is taking a greater and greater role, and the expectation is that he will take this whole thing forward beyond my time here walking around on the planet. So that's the best plan we have. And of course, we're adding the personnel necessary to support him in that role. I'm frankly not doing much traveling, if any, other than SHOT Show anymore. And obviously I would have been at the NRA show if the NRA show had actually happened. So,
well, no, that sounds like a smart plan, and the show will be in good hands with your son. When this is all said and done and you do your final sign off, what do you want your legacy to be in the industry? What do you want people to be saying about Jim Scoutten?
I don't have a slogan for my tombstone. I'm not even sure I want a tombstone, but it's been a surprising ride. I will share this with you. When I stepped out of that original production company, because you remember they were gonna shut down the gun show.
Yeah.
With a couple of other people who had been part of that production company. We thought we were going to do car shows because we had done Motor Trend Television and Car and Driver Television, and of course those are all long gone because the industry, the cable industry, got interested in dysfunctional families fighting over motorcycles.
Yeah.
And that's why we named the company Tier 1 Media, which a Tier 1 supplier in the auto industry is authorized to sell direct to the manufacturer. So that's what we thought we were going to do. Did a couple of things that way, but then it turned out to be the gun show that carried us all this distance and promises to carry us on forward. If there's a legacy here, is he's done it longer, and we hope in some of our presentations we say nobody does it better. So a lot of imitators over the years who have come and gone, some still hanging around, but this is how quality television is done, in our opinion, that fits in that business case where you got to be mindful of your expenses.
Great words of wisdom. So how can people find more information about you and your programs?
Well, we negotiated a rock solid position, 52 weeks of the year. Shooting USA appears on Outdoor Channel at 9:00 Eastern and Pacific. Not to get too technical. That's on Wednesday nights, by the way. I better put the Wednesday in there. So that's the primary piece of work that reaches into all counties, regardless of whether or not they have high-speed internet. And that's just like copies of American Handgunner. They go to those mailboxes in the so-called D counties out on the rural place where guns are actually used and legal to shoot. Yeah. We also have a website, a long-standing website, which is shootingusa.com. We post support material there, so and reference that in every show. If you want more information on what you saw, go to shootingusa.com.
Well, Jim, you've been called America's most watched firearms reporter. You've climbed to the peak of the shooting video industry, and hopefully we got a lot more years of seeing you on various channels. And it's been great talking to you here on the Guns Magazine podcast.
My pleasure, and we wish you all the best.
I hope you enjoyed my talk with Jim Scoutten, and with that, we hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Make sure to please tell all your friends, even the liberals. Guns Magazine is #1 in the business, and we're using our decades of friendships to bring you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you have questions, comments, or a guest you'd like to recommend for the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you don't miss out on anything by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast directory and YouTube. And of course, you can always listen and download our episodes at gunsmagazine.com. While you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister publication, American Handgunner Magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. Maybe you should also consider subscribing to one or both print magazines so our progressive internet overlords can't stop you from reading about guns. Before we go, I'd like to remind you to check out our sponsor and friend, Kimber Firearms, at kimberamerica.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast for the entire crew at FMG Publications. I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.